Mercifully, friends, we are nearing the end of our journey through 1 Timothy 2, verses 11 to 15. Today we are dealing with verse 15. Traditionally, it's been considered a difficult verse. The main reason it's considered a difficult verse is that it doesn't make much sense in what is widely considered the setting of the chapter. So the traditional understanding of the setting of the chapter is that Paul is laying down roles for men and women within a church worship service. If he's talking about what happens in a church worship service, how on earth do we make sense of his reference to being saved through childbearing? There are three views on this. I hold very definitively to one of them. So this one is not one where I'm going to leave it open. I'm going to tell you what I think the verse means, but giving you the three views at the same time. The verse says, "Yet she," notice the singular, she, "will be saved through childbearing if they," so we got this switch from singular to plural. In verse 11, it switched from plural women to singular women. And here we've got she and they in both verses, or in this verse. If they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. What are the three historical understandings of this verse? One, which we'll call I'll call it the traditional view. Maybe that's not fair, but don't have a better word for it. One is to say, well, Paul has been talking about women accepting their role, not as teachers and pastors, but as submissive. And in this understanding, childbearing becomes a metaphor for accepting your role being in the sphere of the home, as a homemaker, wife, child rearer, etc. Two is what I'll call the messianic view. So in this view, the childbearing, and in Greek it has the article, we can't unpack that in detail, but the childbearing is understood as being a reference to the birth of Christ, who came as the Savior. And he comes to save, and thus we are saved through not the act of childbearing and not accepting roles, but through the childbearing. In other words, the birth of the supreme child, the Savior. And the third view, I'll call it the literal view, or I think it's the most natural reading of this, is that she, referring to a woman or a wife, will be saved through childbearing, because the word saved can have the sense of protected, healed, spared, delivered, etc. She will be preserved through childbearing if they, and they then would refer to the married couple, continue in faith. Trust God for his protection and deliverance there. Now, I very, very much favor the third view out of these. If we read the passage as speaking to conduct in a church service, verse 15 makes, frankly, no sense. If you want to tell women to accept their traditional role, surely there's a better way to do it than through this cryptic, nonsensical statement. Maybe the same argument applies to the messianic view, but an absolutely natural way of reading this text seems to be, if we're talking about a woman or a wife, as she, and then we revert to the idea that they, the couple, continue. How does this fit the context of 1 Timothy? We know from the letter that childbearing was being opposed as part of the false teaching. For example, look at chapter 4, verse 3, and look at the discussion of widows in chapter 5. In both of those, we see that the idea of women having children was under attack. In the ancient world, childbearing was the number one cause of death for women. And so the temptation to draw back from having children for fear of the high risk would be very strong. And what I think we're dealing with here is a quite straightforward statement. She, the one bearing the child, will be protected through the dangerous act of childbearing if the couple, they, continue in faith, love, holiness, and self-control. This would presuppose that the context for 1 Timothy 2 is not a church service, because that meaning doesn't fit. Why on earth would we be talking about natural church service right in the midst of talking about roles for men and women in the life of the church? But it does seem to be the plain sense reading, in my opinion, of verse 15. I realize that there will be strong opposing views on this one, and that's absolutely fine. We probably won't come to agreement. If the plain sense makes sense, any other sense is nonsense. If you took this verse and you simply read, she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, wouldn't you most naturally think that it's talking to a couple, saying the wife is assured of some protection and deliverance through the danger of childbearing if the couple trust God for his will and pattern of them having children? I think that makes a lot of sense. It does mean that reading the preceding 4 verses as applying to order in the church is problematic. So I hope that's helpful, or at the very least stimulating, even if you're not persuaded. Would appreciate your thoughts on why you do or do not find that reading of this verse convincing. And appreciate a like, appreciate a subscription. I'll see you in the next video.